This is the Cloud Security Today podcast, where leaders learn how to get cloud security done. And now your host, Matt Chiodi.
Today, I'm joined by Ken Huang, an AI security researcher, author, and Cloud Security Alliance leader who sits at the intersection of security, agentic AI, and security architecture. In this episode, we're digging into a question every CISO is either about to face or is already dealing with. When AI agents start taking action across enterprise systems, how do we know who they are, what they're allowed to do, who they're acting for, and how to stop them? Ken recently co-authored a CSA paper called Agentic AI Access Management, a New Approach. And we are going to be talking about that paper today. This is foundational research, in my view, for a CISO or an identity team that's just looking at how they can put a governance framework in place before AI agents go big from a production perspective. Let's jump into it. Ken, thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you. Yeah, eventually we made it, right?
We did. This
Thanks
took
for your
how
time.
many months?
Yeah.
It took about 6 months.
Right. Yeah.
Well, you are in high demand because the thing everybody wants to talk about, everybody, even if I got on a call and it has nothing to do with AI, of course it does, but not directly. This is what people want to talk about. So I'm really grateful that you've made the time to come on the show because I know you're in high demand.
Thank you, Matt, for your persistence. Yeah, also the flexibility.
So before we get into the research, and you've done a lot of research, just tell us a little bit like how your background in identity and access management, cloud security, Web3, like how did that lead you to AI and more specifically agent identity?
So yeah, I always look at the technology advancement from security perspective. That was started when I was doing a project at Capital One long time ago with CGI. That time was American Management System. We did a next generation collection system for them. And its early days was OWASP, so I contribute. Some of this was the validation things. But at that time, one of my tests found the SQL injection error before everyone talking about. That get me interested. When cloud start, identity become one of the most important thing to take a look. So actually in 2011, I think, I have a presentation about we're still up in the air with the cloud. I think people, if search Ken Huang identity cloud, may be able to find my slide.
Okay.
So yeah, the identity, that time, there's Liberty Foundations, right? The Identity Federation, SIMO is coming up. There's some cloud initiatives, OAuth 2, I think, yeah. So don't quote me on exact date. So yeah, this is how I get interested in the identity space. So your question is, so recently, the AI, agentic AI, right, identity. So we look at the OAuth, the SIMO, they are more for the web area for people, right? Maybe also for the APIs, the service account, not really for the agentic identity in multiple agent system. That you need some of delegation, some of dynamics in the identity management. That's why we wrote a research paper, first published in Archive, and also we go through the formal review process with the Cloud Security Alliance and publish as a white paper.
If I play that back, so you've been doing this for a while. You mentioned 2011, so this isn't something that you started just in the last year or two. So you've been at this for a while. You mentioned the OWASP Foundation, something that you had done originally there. One of the researchers, found the SQL injection right before people were talking about. So you've been at this for a while. Now you used a couple of the terms that I think some folks may not be as familiar with. You talked about MAS, right? The multi-agentic system. Just maybe 30 seconds, what do you mean by a multi-agentic system?
Yeah, so it's multiple agent. They could be in different kind of architecture pattern. Maybe you have the hierarchical, have a super agent or the manager agent, delegates the work for sub-agent, or maybe there is a swarm of agent communicate with each other. But the key characteristic is it has a certain level of autonomy. It may use the tools. It's goal-oriented, like you give a task, it's trying to accomplish your task, right? It may inherit some different set of privileges from the people's identity and also from the service account. And there is non-determinism inside it. That's why we have enlarged the security concerns or attack surface if we are not careful. That's why we need the threat model.
So multi-agent system is something basically, and it's agents, more than one, multiple agents that are working together. It's as simple as that. But it sounds simple, but it's not simple, right? So let's look at this from an identity and access management perspective. As I started out the show, right, one of the things I get 90% of calls, people want to talk about non-human identity. They want to talk about IAM with agents. Most CISOs that I talk to, they are being asked to approve AI agents. Let's just back all the way up. What's the core identity problem that they need to understand first? Because they're probably thinking about it from a traditional IAM perspective. But what's the core identity problem that most maybe cybersecurity teams need to understand first?
So in the agentic AI space, at this point, I think the core thing is really depends on what exactly the task you need to give to agent. What kind of level of autonomy you will give to it. What is his context of memory management? And what is the runtime control intervention that you can do with this? And eventually how it fit into the existing platform, how it communicate with other agent. So I call it the AI core. A means what kind of autonomy you can use. I means really the intent for this identity, what it can do, right? What tool it can use. And C is context, right? What context it can use. Like if it forget some security rule in the middle, it can delete your email. We do have this use case.
We saw that, and we saw that a couple of weeks ago, right?
Yeah, it's because of compaction. It's a compact the rule that you should never delete my email. And that through compaction, it's important the security rule get discarded, right? So context management is important. And then observability, right? So AI core CO, right? Observability need to be built in for this identity, what it does, right? So you basically have a trace, you can using Langsmith or whatever framework you use to trace it. And then you have a runtime. Basically, you can have an intervention. You can steer it. If you can say, okay, please do not delete my email. You cannot steer it in the middle, then it's a problem. So that's why I think the most recent Codex as well as the Cloud Code. So it's always a coding agent, I think, leading the pack in terms of innovation. So Codex in the middle, you can just write it, steer. So it steer it towards what you need. And with Cloud Code, you can always say, by the way, right, BTW, by the way, this is what you need to consider. So it's also kind of like a runtime intervention there. I think that is also needed when you're trying to build the system and with really the identity in place, right? Then COR, this runtime, and E is really the ecosystem, the evaluation. You have to build the evaluation benchmark or repeatable, like, right, to see if it has some regression on your whatever prompt or whatever the output, whatever schema you provided to the model. So evaluation is important, and also the ecosystem, how it fit into your existing environment, how it can do the A2A calls or MCP, how to use MCP tool. All this, I think, need to be thinking like a security consideration needed, both from the agent ecosystem and also from the identity perspective, right? This is a security consideration, but in order for you to really find what vulnerability you can have, I do believe that you can using Maestro framework. Many
The
people
Maestro
use
framework.
it. Right. Yeah, we can, if we have time, we can dive deeper. But if we don't have time, people can use the tool called maestro-sentinel.com. It's free,
Okay.
mostly free, so people can use it to brainstorming with the tool. Yeah.
Okay. All right. I will link to that in the show notes. So part of the conversation that I often have is, every organization, if it's an enterprise of any scale, they already have, they have all these different identity and access management systems in place. They've got something for single sign-on. They've got something for identity governance, maybe like a SailPoint or a Savient, something like that in their environments. Now, in the paper, which is called, this came out last year, it's called Agentic AI IAM, A New Approach. You call out in there, you and a couple of the other authors call out 6 areas where IAM falls short for multi-agent systems. We don't have time to go through all 6, but some of them, let's maybe just double click on. One is it listed coarse and static permissions. So predefined roles, the way we do things today, are often too broad for fluid AI agent needs, leading to over-provisioning, over-privileging, and operational bottlenecks. Talk a little bit around that, because most of the practitioners I've spoken with, they are trying to fit agents into that existing role-based model. Where does that go wrong?
Yeah, so you look at the SIMO or OAuth. In most cases, you define the scope during deployment time. You can say, like, you have access to my Google Drive. You cannot really say you can have access to my Google Drive for this particular file for how much duration during deployment time, right? You configure it like if you configure your application, client application with OAuth, this would give you the scope, right? So it's a cost-blended scope. It's static. There is certain like a new approach to say you have runtime, you register, you cannot discover the client metadata to have it a little bit, right? But lots of is a patchwork, the attribute-based access control using CDAP policy, right? So it's not really defined at the protocol level. So that's why we said maybe we need to extend the OAuth or maybe a new approach. I was invited at the National Science Foundations and also the National Science Academy. They have a joint workshop on the agentic AI security. So one of the topic is certainly about the agent identity, and people from Microsoft, NVIDIA, OpenID, we discuss about that. And I think we are in agreement that we have not have a standard definition yet. What is agent identity, right? And also I was with ITU as well, talking about the potential we can discover, define it. The recent Science Institute was AI OWASP, AI Exchange, was also thinking about if we can define the identity, that would be good. But I think it's still some time before we actually define it. So it's like when you say double click, it's how we can dynamically define the scope based on the intent. So it's intent-based access control, right? That actually one of my Substack articles talking about. I think it will be interesting. Maybe a little bit of double click on this is currently what we do is we both overprivileged and underprivileged, right? It's for a certain task, like to give you the whole HR, for example, right? Human resource privilege to this particular agent, then it really is too overprivileged. The scope is too big. But when it's trying to do something to accomplish the different, the same task, but maybe need different privileges from another human identity, then it's stuck. So it's also underprivileged, right? That's why intent-based access control with task scope is important. So just a high level, right? What
Yeah.
I think is you need to constrain the domain with an ontology to understanding the intent, because otherwise the intent is really too broad. You can say an apple, the apple can be a fruit or Apple iPhone or maybe a big city, right?
That's right.
But yeah, so if you just constrain to, okay, I'm talking about this in the mobile phone, right? So Apple is iPhone. So that's maybe more constrained. It's similar in the identity or in the business domain. You can constrain it to your business domain. You build an ontology, and whenever certain words come in, it will binding to the ontology to understand the intent. Then you can translate the intent through the policy, right? A CDA policy is commonly used for that, and then you can enforce it. And that's why I actually built a proof of concept tool in the GitHub. I didn't advise it yet, but it's there. People can take a look. It's basically if you're using OpenClaw, Cloud Code, or client CLI tool, you can register against my agent control as one of the agent.
Okay.
Then that one has intent-based access control in it.
Interesting.
So you have like people from HR may not have access to GitHub, right? And your developer may have access to GitHub, but not to other database, the production database. So there is sample CDA policy for the different personality in it. So whenever you run this code, you're using Cloud Code, right? You do not directly go through it. It has to say agent control launch or run this particular tool, Cloud Code. Then Cloud Code will always ask the deterministic control layer to do the work. So I think it will be interesting. I just put it there, just I think only a few stars. I don't really.
Well, I will link to that in the show notes. So let me play that back to you, because there was a lot that you packaged in there. So we were talking about when you look at how traditional IAM works, but how it works with multi-agent systems. We were talking about specifically OAuth, right? And OAuth, and how right now we either, if you look at it, it's very not very granular in terms of how you give access, right? You said oftentimes it's either over or underprivileged. And the way, if you look at the current OAuth scope today, there's nothing in there that would allow it to give what you called intent or task-based scope. So I think the example that you give in the paper is like, hey, when today, if you have Claude and you want to give it access to your Google Drive, it's not very granular in terms of it. You can say, yes, it's basically read only or full access. That's about as good as you get, right?
Right.
And so the point there is that those are with existing scopes around OAuth. So it sounds like there needs to be some evolution, but changes to those types of standards, they take time. They take a lot of time for that to happen. Yeah. Let me ask you this. Many companies already have some non-human identity as part of their identity and access management programs, right? NHI. We talked about this a little bit, but why is an AI agent, call it, different from a service account, an API key, or a workload identity? Because again, I think I often see people saying, well, I already have a context for NHI. I'm just going to put my agents in that. So some of this I think is related to what we were talking about, but maybe just give us a little bit more detail around why someone can't just treat, or not that they can't, but maybe they shouldn't treat an agent like just another non-human identity, like a service account. Where does that break?
Right. So just take example, service account for the data access or for database, right? If you give the agent this service account, it's overprivileged or underprivileged or both, right? So really depends on your task. Again, like go back. Your task is to read the example I always quote is the resume database to find the best candidate. So it really should read the resume database, and although it has the service account, maybe has the read write access, it only can read. And if the agent has a certain level of autonomy, there's some indirect prompt injection in the resume database. When it reads the resume, it's all actually do the update, or it's read something else, right, in the table. That's possible because of the two things. One is potential indirect prompt injection coming from all different sources, from the resume itself or from what it can search, right? Go back to lethal traffic if we're talking about, right? And also internal model hallucination, also possible with the model misunderstood the intent and can delete the whole database. That happens as well. So you just give a service account, it's not sufficient. You have to really very well scope it. So that's why coming back to a dynamic policy control, and always need a thin layer, always real time, you can check it, right? So agent, before it do a major critical or high impact task, it needed to check. So there's balance. So you don't have to always check. Like if you just do scanning the resume database to find the best candidate, you don't have to check. But if we say it need deleted, it has to go through it, right? So this is how the intervention is really important in the runtime intervention.
So in the short term, so you were talking about like, hey, a service account versus an agent that's doing something, and if you just treat them just like you would a static service account, again, it's the same thing. It could be under provisioned, it could be over provisioned, and use the example of like, hey, I've got a resume, it's going through, and its main thing is to go and scan and try to find the best resume. That's a static process that normally happens if it's scripted, right? Just a traditional script. It's very static. But you're saying now when you add a autonomous or semi-autonomous agent to that, you're now opening it up. It still has the same privileges as that static, service account was running, but on top of it, now you have two additional attack vectors, right? You've got indirect prompt injection, which could come from the resume itself, and then the second was just model hallucination. Did I get that right? Is that about right? Perfect. Now the second area that you call out where traditional IAM falls short for multi-agent is what you called dynamic trust and inter-agent authentication. Basically, the summary was it lacks native support for peer-to-peer trust establishment between autonomous agents from different domains. So this is, I think, many organizations that I speak to today, they either have agents that they've developed that are customer facing, or they have internal agents, which this is also very likely. They have internal agents that carry out some type of task that maybe a knowledge worker had done in the past. This here is saying that with traditional IAM authentication methods, OAuth, SAML, etc., there's no way to establish trust boundaries if, for example, organization A has an agent that needs to interact with organization B's agent. Talk a little bit more about that. What is the challenge there? And I guess the really bigger question is this isn't theoretical anymore. What can organizations do today with the frameworks that exist in those different across organizations, agents needing to talk to each other?
Right. So if we go back to the web tool or whatever the name we give it, which is more like a no agent or human in the web, we're using some of idea of the federation, right? SIMO is the federation, Libra Federation, WS Web Service Federation. So you basically at the corporate level, you can federate your identity into this, so you can have business to business transactions. That framework is not sufficient. I don't say that it's it's not needed. It's still needed, but it's not sufficient for the agent-to-agent communications, precisely because of what we call as a non-determinism, right? It's non-deterministic, it's autonomy. So we do need to really think about how we can re-architect that.
Ken, one of the areas that you also call out in the paper is this whole concept of dynamic trust, or what I would call inter-agent authentication. And it's the fact that if you look at how our existing IAM frameworks, they really fall short around this. Talk with a little bit more around just why is this a challenge? Can we use existing federation methods? Where does this fall short for multi-agent systems?
Right. Yeah. So traditional Web 2 or whatever name we should give it, basically you have the human involved. The federation for business to business, like if you have a partner application, you can using SIMO or OAuth. In this case, federation is still needed precisely because of the non-determinism, the autonomy involved. We need to rethink about the agent-to-agent identity handoff, right? What kind of privileges you cannot really, like agent A maybe have a privilege to have access to the database and also to a message queue, or maybe even have to the email box. And when it delegate to another agent, it should not really give this to another agent because of different scope, subtask scope, right? So in this case, the delegation is not defined yet. We don't know how to define it. We just call it, right? So the idea is you only allow it to, within this particular subtask, to say, okay, this is the budget you have. Like you can give a budget in terms of a token budget, so it will not do the denial of wallet service. And this is the particular tool you can use. You can use in full tools, have file access, and maybe have the access to this particular topic in the message queuing, and have a particular access to this particular database table, or even to the low. And then you can just do the access to certain another file, or maybe Google Drive for this particular file. There's only for tool you can use in this delegation, and you need to reply to me if your token budget is over 1 million tokens, example, right? And so this is the idea that we need to have, but it's still up to discussions.
So if I hear you correctly, you're saying the scenario here that you're talking about is, again, this is all within the context of a multi-agent system. That first agent is doing something that you've given it to. It could have access to a database, could be a message queue, could be an email. And then that agent needs to take what it just did and hand it off to another agent, or to say, hey, go doing these other things, right? Because typically agents are trained on a fairly narrow set of tasks, right? It's very rare, or agents don't usually work well when you try to give them many, many things to do. So you're talking about here is the fact that like today, our authentication frameworks don't have a good way of doing that delegated, or what you called subtask scope, or undefined delegation. So this is just an area today where we're using OAuth grants, things like that again are very coarse, they're very static, and they don't account for those of granularity. Let me ask you this. Standards like this, they take time to evolve. What's maybe like one or two things that if someone's listening today and they're thinking, oh, wow, like I didn't even realize that there were these challenges and they were trying to put it into the existing frameworks. What's maybe one or two things that a security team can do today to better secure their agents?
Yeah. So before they do anything, they need to give a job description to the agent, kind of like, right, similar to people. So what this agent could do and what we can provision to this particular agent, right? And then in multiple agent system also, that's important to say that when it can hand off to other agent, The current paradigm is really you have a manager agent has access to delegated to the task to specialize the agent, like the sub-agent. This is the current paradigm, but you will see in the future, you may have the swarm of agent that can interact with each other. That will happen, then it's become more complicated, right? But just simplify a little bit is a hierarchical agent. You have the manager agent or supervisor agent, hand off to some subtask agent. So you need to give a job description of a supervisor agent, what it can do, right? It should do just the planning. So it maybe should not have access to everything, right? It just do the planning and maybe it's a good memory context window. It has access to the best model possible to do best planning. And then when it's go to the sub-agent, maybe you have a sub-agent specialized. If you're talking about in the cybersecurity context, you have the triage agent, right? It's just to do the triage, say it's okay, it's a false positive or not. What is my confidence score, right? And then it has only have access to CVE database, maybe internal, right? And also to the incident, see, okay, what is the source IP address, what the destination, if it's happened in the past. So it has its own kind of a privilege, right? Then you have investigation agent, maybe it's actually investigate. If it happened, then it has different privilege. Maybe it has access to sandbox, a sandbox VM to replicate, right? So yeah, I would say first give a job description. Second is do not really put it in the production immediately. Maybe you turn it on 10%. Like you have an onboarding process, right? To tune it a little bit. So you do need some kind of a policy and a guardrail to you are able to gradually relax based on its behavior. It's a treat it kind of because of it's a non-determinism, right? It's like person, right? And it has autonomy, so treat it this way. So this is one approach, is really trying to do this in a traditional way, but still put the guardrail. Another way is really what I heavily advocated before, it's intent-based access control, right? So you may put it more dynamic, right? So you have the ontology, you define the different profile, and then your agent need to always check. So this is a non-negotiation check with this dynamic policy, right? So even that, sometimes the agent can hallucinate and also go back to it may violate its principle to check, right? So this is why we haven't really have no solution yet, right? So need to be careful on this.
So let me play this back. Let's see if I got this right. So we were talking about what are one or two things that a security team can do today to better secure their agents? Because we said a lot of it is just the fundamentals of the authentication protocols themselves. They're just not set up for autonomous agents. They're set up for humans, which work at relatively slow speeds and do things in a way that's much more deterministic. So you said number one was think about your agents in terms of what is their job description, right? What do they do? And so part of this goes back to actually, it's just the architecture of the agents, right? Like it's focusing on, we always say people, process, and technology. Well, in this case here, it's not people, it's an agent. So we have to focus on that. The process is the process by which these agents are created. And I think you didn't say this directly, but one of the things that I think about that I think we need to do for agents that we did for cloud, remember we always talked about shift left, the concept of, hey, don't be working in the UIs. If you remember in the early days of cloud, the biggest challenges were misconfigurations. And the reason those misconfigurations existed was because people were doing things, every cloud environment was like a snowflake. It was unique. It wasn't until we started to use things like infrastructure as code where we could inspect what was going to happen before it was instantiated. This sounds like there's maybe some correlation there, where today we create agents and there's no recipe for these agents. They're all different. And because of that, we struggle with even just the first thing you said, which is giving it a job description. What does it do, right? And if you can really narrow the scope of what that agent does, then at least using our existing frameworks today, we can use least privilege, right? So the concept of least privilege still 100% applies. Did I get that kind of right?
Yeah, I think perfect. I think what you add is really good in terms of play it. Like you're using Terraform, right? Before you deploy it, you can have a playbook, right? To simulate the environment. So I think, you build some of the simulated environment for the agent to play out. It's good. Yeah, I think that's the add-on that you just mentioned. I think it's a good add-on.
So the third thing you mentioned was having an onboarding or really a QA process for your agents, right? So a lot of times what happens is someone plays with an agent, maybe a developer, or maybe it's not even a developer. It could be somebody in marketing, HR that has developed something with Claude Code, right? And this is becoming increasingly more common. I see this in finance departments. They're developing their own agents. And then all of a sudden, it just goes out into production. And that is where challenges go along. So again, I think if we're back here, people, process, and technology, or agents, process, and technology, we're talking about using and defining the process by which agents get released into production. So it sounds like some of this is just really basics of IT, of how we would do things in the past. And we think because agents are new, that a lot of the processes that we've used in the past go away. But it sounds like, we're kind of back to those fundamentals right now while we wait for the underlying protocols to catch up.
Yeah, that's what actually in multiple kind of conference, I emphasize that the NIST AI risk management framework is still applied. It's really good. It has govern, map, measure, and manage function for the risk management, right? So govern is really say who really kind of like racing model, who is responsible for what in this agentic AI deployment, right? And what is the GRC policy you have? And map is really map your agentic AI system to find out the vulnerabilities. So we're using Maestro framework as one of the tool. The lethal traffic is actually operate on the layer 2 of the Maestro framework on the data layer. The lethal traffic meaning that you have access to your internal data. You can also have access to potentially malicious with indirect prompt injection possible, right? The external data, and then you can act upon it or do the actions, right? Or effect some changes, then it's lethal traffic. So you have to limit it to just two, but that's not enough, right? So that's why we need the whole like 7-layer Maestro framework. That's the map, and then the measure is really what kind of risk we're facing. Is this we need to act immediately, or we can wait, or we can observe for it. And this is what actually OWASP AI VSS project that I lead, right? We're trying to say for this particular agent AI risk, tool misuse, for example, or on this particular environment, should we fix it or should we just wait, right? Observe it. So that's is for the measure part of it. And the management is really what is we talking about onboarding process, job description, then we need to do red teaming, right? And what you add is simulation, simulate it. It's a kind of like red teaming, but it's a simulation. It do is a TEVV in NIST term is a test, evaluation, verification, validation, right? This process. And so it's the whole process. It's a full function. I think the NIST framework still applies. Yeah, the traditional like shift to left, all these things still apply. I would say they are necessary, but not sufficient. That's always right. Same thing like a model alignment, model adversely training. This is necessary for our security, but not sufficient, right? Currently, missiles coming out. They train it the model using coding, kind of trying to improve the coding capability, but eventually it has emerging capability doing the cybersecurity offensive and both offensive and defensive, right? So its offensive capability is so strong that they do not want to release it immediately, right? So that's why we basically need to go through like what you said, the least privilege still applies, shift to left, the traditional security like people process technology still apply, but it's not sufficient. You need to augment your security program in the agentic AI. You cannot say we currently security program will still work, right? It's a necessary foundation layer for deterministic software. You need to add on top of it the deterministic, the autonomy side of it.
So I appreciate that because I think a lot of times when there's new technology, people send the sky is falling, and certainly there are serious risks that come with agentic AI. We're seeing it every day. So two things that you called out. One was the NIST AI risk management framework, right? Which covers those key areas: govern, map, measure, and manage. So that's one that our listeners can, if they haven't read it, they can go back and look at that today. That was something that's very practical. The second one you mentioned is the Maestro framework. That's spelled Maestro. And that's a specialized threat modeling approach designed for agentic AI systems, focusing on risk, security, and outcomes across 7 layers, which we don't have time to get into today. But those two frameworks, I think, will give and take a lot of the anxiety out of that whole agentic conversation. So I appreciate you bringing those up. Ken, you are in a lot of different places. You were doing research for multiple different firms, from the Cloud Security Alliance to multiple other places. We know you have conversations with NVIDIA. Given that you are at the center of all things AI, how do you stay sharp? What's your process? How do you stay up to date on the advances that are happening seemingly like on an hourly basis? What's your process look like?
So my doctrine is always health number one. So you have to keep health so you can keep sharp. Second is you're never too late to learn. So it's always a lifelong learning process. Third is, I would say, you need the family first, right? Everything family first. So you self is first, the family is also first. The second is the work. So this 3 principle, I think, is very important. That's what actually I use it, right? So how do I learn? My learning process is read fast, I would say. I also listen to some good podcasts, and recently I also write something so it can play back to me. So I kind of text to speech, listen to my own writing as well. just trying to see what need to be updated or if it makes sense when the way I listen to it was reading to it. So that is good. I would say I think the best way of learning is writing about it. That's why I write books. I write a Substack. I reached 100,000 subscribers a few days ago. So
Wow, congratulations.
thank you. Yeah. So it's the Substack I started a year ago. Just kind of a hobby. I always write. In the old days, like it's called the Usix or Usenet. I forgot what it is. I wrote some things. And then there is a Google blog coming. I write something about that. In very old days, I actually wrote a very popular article to compare the Java with Smalltalk on object-oriented programming. It was popular at that time, but I don't think people can find it anymore. But writing it helped me to understanding the topic more, I would say.
I love that. one of my good friends says that writing is thinking. And I couldn't agree more. If you can't explain something in writing, then you probably don't understand it that well yourself. And it's a great way to learn. So Ken, you're impressive. If anyone wants to check out Ken's Substack, it's kenhuangus.substack.com. I just signed up myself while we were recording. So I'm now your 100,001 subscriber. Congratulations on that. But thanks, Ken, for coming on the show. This has been a great conversation.
Thank you for joining us for today's episode. To find out more, please visit us at cloudsecuritytoday.com.